Hello, everybody. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. Um, Ashley asked me to give a talk on the potato market outlook, so that's what I'm going to cover. This Zoom thing is a little bit new to me, so hopefully I'm recording it correctly and you can hear me. As far as the direction I'm going to go, I'd like to quickly talk about the potato production in 2021, both for the US and Canada. And I guess I'll briefly talk about production in Europe as well, since they're our main competitors. We'll cover French fry trade around the world and talk briefly about prices and cost of production, and then some other things that have impacted the markets lately, including the PEI quarantine. So to start off with, this chart or this table shows US production for 2021 versus the last 3 years. And you can see at the bottom of the chart that US production was down about 1.6%. This year, we're at 413 million hundredweight of potatoes produced. But it's kind of variable. Some states had good years and some states didn't have such good years. To be honest, one of the main reasons it's down so much is because Idaho production is down a lot. We planted 315,000 acres in Idaho in 2021 and only 300,000 in 2020, but our production is still down 2% with that 15,000 acre increase. And that's mostly, almost all because of the extreme heat throughout the Pacific Northwest this year. It really did knock yields back quite a bit throughout the state, as well as in Washington and Oregon. And that's a major reason for the big decline this year, although there were significant declines in other states as well. This next chart shows the total production for each state, each of the 13 major states. There are other states that produce potatoes, but these are the major ones that USDA tracks. And you can see that Idaho is by far the largest, followed by Washington, and Wisconsin and Oregon come in right behind that. But, you know, the heat took a toll on the yields in Idaho and Washington and Oregon. And then other places had excellent crops. Wisconsin and Michigan had excellent crops, but they had extremely wet harvest, lots of rain during harvest, and those potatoes were mostly harvested, but they're in storages now, and people are watching them closely to make sure that they don't have a wreck. But places like North Dakota and Minnesota had severe droughts, and yields were cut significantly in those states. And then if you look at Maine and Colorado, they had excellent crops, good yields, good quality. But the kind of the challenges throughout the industry, and it's the same with every industry, is there are potatoes in the US, but moving them where they need to be to processing plants, like for instance, moving all the excess potatoes in Maine, they had the best crop ever there. Moving those excess potatoes to Idaho or the Columbia Basin where they can be used for processing is extremely difficult nowadays with all the transportation and logistical issues. It's still happening, but it's extremely expensive and difficult to line up. I threw this chart in here at the last minute just because I think that it shows a significant change that is probably pretty important for most, for the potato industry in general. You know, Idaho produces Burbanks, Russets, and then Russet and Norcotas as well. And over the last 30 years, this blue line shows the percentage of Russet Burbanks versus the percentages Russet Norcota potatoes. And we have shifted varieties over the last 30 years to last year in 2020, we were at 50% of each, Burbanks versus Norcota. And that's significant because Russet Norcotas, you know, people like to grow them, especially in the western and central part of the state, because they yield better and they store well and they look pretty and they sell well, but they're not the best for frying. They have a lower gravity, and so they don't make the best French fries. Well, Burbanks make excellent French fries, and growers in the east still grow mostly Burbanks. But what this has done, the shift has actually restricted the amount of open market potatoes that can go to frozen processing industry. When they normally have a shortfall, they could go out and pick up the open market potatoes. And they'd mostly be russet Burbanks and they'd fry well. But fryers this year have been picking up open market potatoes of both varieties, even though North Dakotas don't typically fry as well. They're still picking them up and using them because they're so short in Idaho and the Columbia Basin. They'll fry whatever they can get that will fry, even though the quality might be lower and the fries might be shorter. They'll still use them. And that's kind of changed things in Idaho and caused a significant price increase because of the shortfall in the crop and also the change in varieties. Looking at Canada's production, Canadians produced their largest crop ever this year. Their production is up 18.2% overall. And if you look at some of these larger producing areas like Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, they've had 36%, 58% increases. And those are huge, huge areas of potato production in Canada. Now, it's important to remember that they had horrible years in 2020, and that's one of the main reasons for the big increase this year. They had severe drought and very, very low yields last year in 2020, but bumper yields this year on their crop. And so there's excess potatoes, just like there are excess potatoes in Maine. All of the Atlantic Canadian provinces have excess potatoes too that they need to move. And there are fryers around the country that need to use them. If you'll notice, when I talked about the US production increases, almost all the states had negative signs. They all mostly declined in production, not all, but a lot of them. And the only one to decline in production in Canada was British Columbia, and it was down slightly, but it's a very small player. So a lot of potatoes in Canada. You combine the two, well, I guess I first need to show this chart. It shows the big increases in PEI and New Brunswick, also in Quebec and Ontario. All four of those provinces had record yields this year. This is important to note that Manitoba and Alberta, where a lot of the French fry processors are at, they increased in production, but not nearly as much as they increased or as they had planned on increasing. They had planted a lot more acres in those two provinces. And so production did go up, but it didn't go up like they thought it would. They had problems with the same excess heat that we had in the Pacific Northwest. It really took their yields down. So potatoes have been moving from New Brunswick west to processing plants in Manitoba and Alberta. But, they'd like to move them from PEI, but now there's a quarantine, which I'll discuss about later. So combine the two countries, Canadian and US production. US production is down, Canadian production is up. If you look at the combined production for the two, and it really is important to combine the two as North American production. We have the same processors on both sides of the border. It acts as one industry, the North American potato industry. But 530 million hundredweight in 2019 before COVID hit with the 2019 crop. And then everybody cut production in 2020 because of the uncertainty caused by COVID. And we produced 524 million hundredweight. And then, things rebounded and growers planted a lot more potatoes in 2021, but the yields weren't there as expected. And so we ended up producing 535 million hundredweight, which is more than both 2019 and 2020 crops, but significantly lower than what had been anticipated. And here's an example. If you look at the US trend yield, it would have been 433 sacks, or 433 million hundredweight is what our production would have been if we could have produced the trend yield. And we actually produced 413 million hundredweight total. So our yields were way down, and that really did take the production down, which is translated into good prices. But Just looking at Idaho and Oregon and Washington, Washington planted 5,000 more acres this year. Idaho planted 15,000 more acres this year, so a total of 20,000 more acres. But we still produced 10,000 or 10 million and a half hundredweight less potatoes in those two states. And if you go off the trend yield of what people were expecting to produce, that is actually 16.6 million hundredweight less than growers and processors in the Pacific Northwest had anticipated. So, that's why the Idaho and Pacific Northwest processors are in a bind, because there's just not the production there. They have excess capacity and no potatoes to run through, not enough. The opposite happened in Canada. If you look at their trend yield, they would have produced 120.7 million hundredweight, and they actually produced 123. So they overproduced, and they have excess potatoes in Canada. PEI, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario alone have 17.5 million hundredweight more potatoes this year than they would have had. Manitoba and Alberta, even with all the increase in acreage that they planted, still have about 5 million hundredweight. Well, they're about 500 million hundredweight short of their expectations. So processors there don't have enough potatoes to make it through the year unless they can get excess potatoes from these other 4 provinces or other states. As far as EU production goes, our main competitors for French fries around the world are the main fry producing countries of Germany, France, Poland, Netherlands, and Belgium. And you can see where their production lies. These are the first estimates that we have, but Germany's production was down about 9%, France about 2%, Poland about 10%, the Netherlands 4%, and Belgium about 9%. Overall, our EU competitors' production is down about 7%. So globally, a tight potato supply this year. Although there are places with more potatoes than they can use, but globally the supply situation is rather tight. This chart shows how global French fry trade has changed. It shows that it rebounded after COVID. You can see the dip here in 2020 when trade kind of stalled out for a few months. It didn't take very long, 3 or 4, 5 months to rebound back to before the pandemic hit in March. But the blue area shows North American production, so Canada and US combined. Not production, but French fry trade, global French fry trade. The green bar, or the green area, shows those European competitors trading. They've increased, we've increased too, but they've increased at a much faster pace over the last 20 years. But global French fry trade has just skyrocketed. And then the others include Argentina, New Zealand, and China in the red area. As far as our share goes, you can see here, I guess I should have pointed out at the top that global French fry trade is about 8.5 billion pounds of potatoes, products, frozen potato products, mostly French fries in 2020, 2021 crop year, or not crop year, calendar marketing year. I should have pointed out this chart goes from the year ending August 31st. So that's the most recent data available at the time of recording this. Our North American market share kind of dipped during the COVID year, but has bounced back. We gained a little bit of ground on European French fry trade. We were at 28.7% of the market, where they're still at 63.3%, but they lost a little bit of ground and we gained a little bit. That'll be hard to hold on to with a shortage of potatoes. Of course, Europe has a shortage too, but maybe not as significant as ours. These two pie charts just show where the frozen product French fries go around the world. And you can see that in 2020, 2021, the Asia Pacific countries were our major importers of French fries. And there were a lot of fries that go to South America and European countries. The Middle East is huge. Another one that's increased a lot in just the last year is Mexico. And U.S. has been working with Mexico and, well, basically battling it in courts for 20 something years to try to get the Mexican markets opened up to U.S. potatoes like they were supposed to be when the North American Free Trade Agreement was first put into place. But those markets in Mexico really have opened up lately, and they've taken a lot of product, not just French fries, but even a lot of fresh potatoes too. And then the other smaller importing regions, North America and other North American countries, Central America, China, and others combined. I throw this chart in here just to illustrate how wild the markets are. It's kind of an interesting year. This is what we call the seasonal price index. It shows the pattern of prices, the average pattern of prices for Idaho Russets, and it's the fresh weighted average. So it's a weighted average of the different sizes of potatoes and different packages. But it shows the change over a year. Now the year, I put it here in weeks. So this starts in August 1st and goes through till the last week would be the last week in July. So that'd be the week 51 of the year, week 52. Typically prices peak right as harvest begins. And they're strong, really strong as harvest gets going. And then they crash hard. And they usually drop about 47.9% from the high in August to the low, which usually occurs the last week in October or the first week in September. And then from that point, they kind of bounce back over the next 5 or 6 weeks. They usually come back about 10 or 12%, and then they kind of coast along until close to harvest again in July when they start to climb back up again. Now, this is a normal seasonal pattern for fresh russet potatoes in Idaho. Now, the next chart shows the difference. So kind of lock that image in your head if you can of that pattern. Okay, this chart shows the same period from August through July, and it shows 3 different years. The 2019 crop year, the 2020 crop year is the green, the 2019 is the blue, and the red bar is this year, 2020 crop. And you can see what happened with the 2019 crop. This is what COVID did to the fresh potato markets. Pretty normal seasonal pattern until we hit March. And then there was a run at the grocery stores and people hoarded potatoes. They tried to get everything they could. And the prices jumped straight up. And then after people got their potatoes at the grocery store, they didn't buy potatoes anymore. They didn't go back to the grocery store for fear of COVID. And prices just plummeted, and they dropped really hard from $25 down to about $15 per hundredweight. And that's when we saw in the news that guys were dumping potatoes, and then pretty soon that thing turned completely back around in about a 4-month period. Prices were back up to where they were before COVID. Friars realized all the potatoes that they had turned back to producers they needed, because French fry, they were short of French fries, so they were clawing back every potato they could get. Some had already been dumped. A lot had already been rerouted through the fresh potato market, and that's what caused this steep price decline. Anyway, that's what happened with the COVID year potatoes. Now, the 2020 crop was a lot more normal, although it did kind of continue to dip down here in January, February, March, and April through June, when it would normally go kind of flat, and it was still pretty flat. But the interesting one here is this, the red line shows how prices have reacted in this year with the short potato crop. And they increased in August like they normally do, and then they fell in October, the end of September and early October. They bottomed out just like normal, but the drop was only 13.1%, the lowest drop in decades. Normally it's, like I said, about 50% or so, dropped 13%. So for example, the 2019 crop dropped 8% from the high to the low, $8, I mean. The 2020 crop dropped $12. And then the 2021 crop only dropped not even $3. It's like $2.75 really. And then since then, it's rebounded and it is actually higher now than it was at the peak in August. And that never happens. Prices never have done that. Right now, the fresh weighted average price is $22.70 per hundredweight, which is 46.5% above last year's price. So prices are extremely strong and not behaving like they normally have in the past. Another situation that has just come about in the last month or so is that PEI, Prince Edward Island, the largest producer in Canada, they've had potato wart in their province for over 20 years, and it's been, they have a protocol in place to manage it, and they've done a really good job managing it. And it pops up every once in a while, a field or two per year have potato wart discovered in them. And it's really usually just a small patch in a field, and they quarantine the fields, and they've done a lot of work to keep their markets open. But for some reason, this year when they found a field, somebody complained to USDA, and they were loud enough that USDA twisted the arm of the Canadian government, and they closed down imports of PEI potatoes into the US and to Puerto Rico. And the PEI guys send a lot of potatoes to Puerto Rico. And so all those potatoes are now trapped in PEI, can't come into US like they need or like they usually do. It's about 2.4 million hundredweight of fresh potatoes and 130,000 sacks of seed that come into the US. Those are stuck in PEI. Growers don't know what to do with them. They're going to have to send them to other places in Canada, although they can't right now send the seed anywhere else. But it's flooded the Canadian market and tightened the US market for potatoes. I imagine Canadian growers will start importing potatoes from New Brunswick and other provinces that are not quarantined. But what it's done is it's further restricted the supply of potatoes in the US. Just before this happened, before the quarantine came, there were large fry companies that were negotiating with PEI growers to ship potatoes all the way from PEI to Columbia Basin and Idaho to process, or to the prairie provinces in Canada. But that's all been shut down now, and those potatoes are just sitting there. So one other thing that's kind of changed drastically, and you've probably already had a talk on cost of production, but when fertilizer prices more than double in a year and chemical prices jump 15 to 40% or more, and fuel prices jump 60% for gas and 40% for diesel, and labor prices jump 15 or 20%, that really does a number on your cost of production. And the big question on everybody's mind right now is, how many potatoes are we in Idaho going to plant in the coming year? We're going to increase production because we have a whole bunch of processors that are short of potatoes this year, and they're going to want as many as they can starting in July. And they're going to probably increase their contract acreage just because French fry markets are red hot right now, and prices are really good, and they're short of raw product supply. And they're gonna need potatoes. So how much are we going to increase when cost of production have skyrocketed like this? Just my rough estimates so far say that your operating costs for most growers are probably up 20% minimum, and maybe as much as 30%. And that doesn't include changes in costs for equipment depreciation and overhead and land rents, which are probably getting pressure to increase as well. And then product availability, whether it's fertilizers, fuel, labor, that's always been a challenge over the last year or two. And the price variability is just wild. How do you plan when prices jump like that in a year? What are they going to be by the time you need to purchase your fertilizer? And can you lock your prices in? It's not an easy thing to do unless you have a lot of leverage. Just one other thing that will impact the acreage that we plant in the coming year in 2022 is the prices of alternative crops. And you can see here this IGRI is the grower return index that we calculate, shows that 2021 versus 2020, the grower return index just October through the first week in December has increased 57.4% over last year. So yes, potato prices are extremely strong compared to where they were a year ago. And that will definitely encourage potato growers to plant more potatoes. But at the same time, wheat prices, looking at September through October, USDA NAS prices, they're up 61% from a year ago. Barley prices are not up as much. They're still kind of low compared to the other crops, but 11.4% for all barley. These are national prices. And malt barley, 6.7%. Alfalfa prices are up 23%. Definitely not Idaho alfalfa prices, but US prices on average. And then corn is up 49.6%. Soybeans are up 27.6%. So not only is this going to encourage or change people's decision making or make it more difficult, I guess, whether they should plant more potatoes or not. In Idaho, it'll also do the same for other states. When corn prices are that high, soybean prices are that high, hay prices are high, wheat prices are high, and the amount of capital it takes to grow an acre of those crops so much less than growing an acre of potatoes. It could cost you $3,500 to $4,200 an acre to plant potatoes if you look at all your costs. That takes a lot of money. So just to wrap up, the supply in the US, North American supply, Canada and the US is overall lower than expectations. Canada's crop's the largest ever, so they have potatoes, but moving them around where they're needed is extremely difficult. European producers have a smaller production than last year, so they're also down. So overall, a tight global potato supply. As far as the domestic export demand for French fries, domestic and export demand is sky high. People are eating out again. They're ordering food online. They go through drive-thrus like they haven't before. And French fry demand is extremely strong right now. And so not only in the US, but globally. So they're going to want more potatoes to plant next year. So the short supply situation in the US has created extremely strong prices. Growers are making a good return this year. Contract prices are up significantly, but so at the same time, so are input costs. And those input costs just add a tremendous amount of risk and make decision-making very difficult. To make the situation even tighter is the PEI quarantine, which I talked about. And then all the uncertainty. We keep having new variants of COVID pop up, and governments make decisions that are hard to predict. And there's still a lot of uncertainty on the potato market and other ag markets as well, but it makes decision-making difficult for the coming year. So I guess my point is I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where we're going to be at this next year, but there's a lot of optimism in the markets right now. Whether or not that can stay is dependent upon the overall economy, I think. So that's all I have today. Hopefully that recorded, and I will see you later. If you need to contact me, there's my phone number and my email address.